Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and pleased to have with me as my guest Sepideh Mousakhani, who's a partner at Cooley. Sepideh, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. What a fun thing to do and break up my day. Happy to be here.
So glad to hear that. Well, the reason I wanted to invite you, because one of the interesting things that really caught my eye was that you did Teach for America. It looks like you did that for almost 2 years. Tell me a little bit about, why you did that and, how that started.
It's a great question. I'm happy to talk about it. Not something I often get to talk about in my current line of work. So I went to Berkeley undergrad, really loved it. I always knew that I wanted to be a lawyer and go to law school, though I didn't quite know exactly what kind of law. I think coming out of college, which was an incredible experience and a lot of time that was spent sort of thinking and living in a theoretical world, I felt like I wanted to do something that was a lot more realistic and on the ground and sort of get back in touch with that and also do something that was a way to sort of give back. And I actually had someone from Teach for America sort of opportunistically reach out to me and do an interview. And so I started to think, okay, maybe this is something that I could do in between, being in college and going to law school. And I had always been, if I sort of look back on it, it kind of makes sense that I ended up doing it. When I was growing up in school, I would always have my friends sort of the night before a final say, hey, like, can we just come over? And I'd sort of teach a little session, like sixth grade math, and sort of coach people through that. And so it actually felt really natural, but that's kind of how I ended up there. And I really enjoyed it for the 2 years that I did it.
Well, where did you teach and what subjects did you teach and
Yeah.
everything?
Yeah, I taught in San Francisco, in Bayview Hunters Point at El Dorado Elementary. I taught fifth grade. So as you can imagine, I had to reteach myself some things. When you're a fifth grade teacher, you're teaching every subject under the sun, as opposed to being in middle school and saying, okay, I'm just teaching math. And so I taught everything. I taught English, I taught social studies, science. I even taught sex education, which was quite interesting and fun experience as a 22-year-old teaching a bunch of 10-year-olds about the changes in their body. But yeah, really fun, and taught them everything there was to teach. So yeah.
Now, when you're in the Teach for America program, do you get to decide where you teach, what levels, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is no. You can sort of make a request for being in a particular geographic location, but it's not guaranteed that it's going to be honored. And so you really could span the spectrum of elementary school, middle school, high school. It kind of just is wherever they decide to place you. And so I feel really fortunate that I was able to be placed in the Bay Area, sort of close to family, because it is a very challenging job to do, and sort of having that support network of family and friends ended up really being important to me. And I also feel really lucky because fifth grade is such a fun age, right? You're old enough that you can sort of talk to them in a way that they understand and they can critically think, but they're still young enough that they don't quite, sort of disregard adults. And so it really is a fun and interesting age. And I think particularly for the population that, we're teaching in Teach for America, it's also a really great opportunity to sort of get in before sometimes it feels like it might be a little bit too late to perhaps change people's, kids' perceptions of what it means to go to school and sort of what their trajectory in life is going to be.
Yeah.
And so I was really fortunate to work with kids.
Were you hoping to teach the fifth grade level, or were you hoping to teach middle school, or you really just had no expectations?
The only thing I was hoping was to not teach middle school, because I reflected on my own experience in middle school and how sort of miserable and challenging it is that I really didn't want to be back there. So I didn't have any really notion other than that. And I thought, younger might be better, just again, because I was 22. So imagining even teaching high schoolers, right, and being 4 years older than them probably would be a challenge. But yeah, middle school is the only one that I really didn't want to teach.
Interesting. But you could have been sent anywhere in the country, literally.
That's right. Yeah. I had friends who in college did Teach for America. One of them ended up in like the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, like right on the Mexico border, which was, had its own unique set of challenges. Yeah, it really could have been anywhere.
Interesting. Now, what kind of training do they provide you?
Yeah, great question. So they basically do like a 6-week boot camp training
Mm.
over the summer, right before you sort of actually start in whatever your school district is. And that boot camp training is sort of the fundamentals of sort of teaching, pedagogy, etc. But you're also actually teaching summer school at a particular jurisdiction. So I was teaching summer school to fourth graders in Watts. And then the other half of my day was spent doing that sort of training of how to teach and what are the sort of concepts, and then doing lesson planning at night. And so it was definitely more than a full-time intensive training program.
Mm-hmm. And what is the commitment for Teach for America?
It's a 2-year commitment.
Okay.
So you come into it. Now, not everybody sort of follows through on the commitment for various reasons. It's not the easiest thing to do. And some people extend it out. But aside from that sort of 6-week training program that I mentioned, you also are going through sort of education classes, right, in connection with the university, because it's not like I worked for Teach for America. I actually worked for the Unified School District in San Francisco. And so you're getting that sort of training to get your teaching certificate at the same time that you're teaching.
So what did you like most about the job, and what did you like least about it?
Yeah, look, what I liked the most about the job was that I felt every single day, even on the hard days, that I was having an impact in some way or another on the students that I was able to have the privilege to teach. And I mean that in sort of the broadest way, right? There are students that it'd be a great moment because, you know, they're coming into my class, so I'm teaching 5th grade, and they are coming into that class at a kindergarten reading level. And so when I have a day where 6 months into it, they've picked up a chapter book and they're able to read it, that's an incredible moment. But it's also a great moment when I am making the time, right, to go to some of my students' football games. I think one of the hard things about being a student in that kind of environment is you come to, because of your life experiences, which are more challenging than probably any that I will ever experience in my whole life, is that you come to a place where you don't necessarily trust adults, or you've had a challenging experience because a lot of people in the sort of teaching system have come to make assumptions about who you are and what you care about and what you're going to be capable of doing. And so making that dedication of time and effort to show that you care about them as people was just as critical as the actual substantive effort that I was making to ensure that they had the skill sets to be successful in 5th grade and beyond. And so to me, looking at students who, when I will never forget this, the day that I sort of started and did the orientations right before we started the first day of class in my first year teaching, and the 4th grade teacher, who had a number of the same students as me, kind of looked at my list and said, "You're going to have such a hard time. Like, these kids are all such a mess and they're a disaster, and you're going to have a really challenging time." And I didn't have that experience. And now it took a lot of time to sort of build up that structure and build up that trust. But if you're 10 years old and people are already saying, like, this person is sort of cast aside and they're not anything, that's really problematic. And so to me, I think about that as absolutely the most valuable thing that I did, and still to this day, one of the most meaningful things that I did. I think the hardest part about it is it's a very challenging job. It is harder than the job that I do today, working as a big law partner, which I know sounds hard to believe, but the stakes are much higher, right? The stakes are you're dealing with kids who have had a really challenging time up until now. And the stakes are like you're trying to make an impact and a difference in a lot of ways where they're already starting so much farther behind from sort of the start line. And so how do you make sure that you're getting them as far as they need to go and dealing with all of the implications that come around it? Like, you have a student who is showing up every single day and hasn't been able to eat. And so how do you expect that student to have space in their mind to create space for learning the thing that they're thinking about is food? And so how do I deal with that? How do I make the time to, outside of school, like regular school hours, dedicate to doing that tutoring off the clock, right? To make sure that you're doing that catch up, because you have to be teaching the class of students, all of whom are at different places. Doing all of that with, by the way, being paid like below the poverty line is a challenge, right? And so I continue to look at that and say, we as a society kind of have our priorities set a little bit wrong here, in the amount of dedication and time it takes to be a teacher in this country and to do it in the way that most teachers do it, which is to care so deeply about their students. It's a hard thing to do. And the hours are just as long, but the credit and the sort of compensation and the way that people are sort of valued is not the same.
Yeah, totally. I can imagine. So when your 2 years came around, were you ready to move on, or did were you sad to be leaving that job? Maybe a
Yeah,
little bit of both. What was your thinking?
definitely a combination of things. So I seriously considered doing it for another year because I
Oh,
felt like
interesting.
I was making such a great impact and it was really important to me and I was enjoying doing it. I felt like I had learned a lot about how to do it in the right way, but I ultimately decided not to because I think if I were to teach, the only place I'd want to teach is somewhere like that. So I knew I wasn't going to teach in sort of a more privileged community where I wasn't dealing with a lot of the same issues.
Mm.
And in order to do that job, it requires sort of everything in you, right? Like you are dedicated to it and only it. Again, like I was spending weekends like going to football games. I was spending after school every single day like tutoring folks until 6 and then spending from 6 to 11 like doing lesson planning and showing up at school the next day at 7, and it took everything out of me and I felt like there wasn't a way for me to do it in the way that I wanted to do it
Mm.
in a sustainable way. And
Mm.
so I didn't want to do it and become jaded or feel like I lost that spark and energy to do it. And so I felt like it was the right time to say, I've done this and I really enjoyed it. And it's going to be an important part of me and the way that I approach the world and the decisions that I make as a citizen in my job, everything.
Mm.
But it's not something that I can do sustainably long term because of the amount of sort of emotional energy and dedication that it takes to do it in the right way.
Yeah, I totally understand. Well, tell me a little bit about how that experience has impacted what you do today and how it impacts your life and your philosophy and the way you approach things and how it impacts like, being a big law firm partner.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of times when I say it's probably the most translatable job and skill set, that's surprising to people. But if you get a little bit more granular and
Mm.
you think about what a teacher is doing, which is taking a student where they are, taking a concept that they understand and communicating in a way that allows that student to understand it and apply it and to think about it critically is what I do every single day with the founders that I work with. It's what I do every single day with board members. It's what I do every single day with investors. And so taking this concept that is difficult and challenging and that I understand after doing this for a decade really easily, like I do with what I used to teach in 5th grade, and breaking it down and scaffolding it in a way that is accessible to someone and that they can understand it and then use that to make decisions is absolutely what I do every day.
Yeah.
If you think about the number of things a teacher has in their mind as they walk around a classroom and they're teaching a lesson, it's the same as the number of things that I'm trying to keep track of and doing a deal and the conversations that I'm having and the emails that I'm sending while I'm also on calls and all of those things, right? I am thinking about, okay, I'm saying this out loud. I'm watching every single student and seeing, are they perceiving and understanding what I'm saying? How do I check for that? I might have a student in the corner over there who I know can get distracted. So at the same time that I'm processing that, I'm walking over and getting physically close to them so that they see that I'm there and that sort of draws their attention back, right? There are a million things going on in your mind when you're teaching, which is the exact same as having all of the various components that you have when you are running and leading a deal and thinking critically. Again, like depending on the question or depending on the way people are reacting to what I'm teaching, I have to pivot and adjust immediately without warning. That's absolutely what I do every single day in my job with like the new question that gets popped up, like with no warning in a meeting, right? So all of those things are absolutely really relevant skills. I think the other piece of it, and this is sort of what I alluded to when I said I had to sort of make a decision about whether I could continue doing it, is this sort of like grit and determination to say, it doesn't matter, where my students are coming in here. I am going to put forth whatever sort of effort and work it takes to help them get to where I think they need to be. And that sort of grit and determination to pull your clients through difficult situations is absolutely what is required to do this job, particularly in a big law environment. And so all of the qualities that would make you a good teacher and teach for America and make you a great associate, I think, a great lawyer, partner, ultimately, that's working with people. And all of those skills have translated over. I think it's also afforded me perspective in a way that is helpful. Like ultimately, what I always tell my associates when they have a moment where they make a mistake is, okay, we focus on the mistake, we understand how we arrived there, we adjust the process so we don't make the mistake again, but we don't dwell on that. And so that perspective of saying the stakes here are important, but they're not life and death. They're not the same as sort of what I think the stakes were when I was teaching, actually afford me the perspective and the calm to be better and to do better and to be closer to perfect when I do this job. And so honestly, like I couldn't have thought of a better way to be prepared to be a lawyer. Like law school was great. I found it intellectually interesting. It's helpful to think about how to become a critical thinker, but the actual raw skill set that I use sort of day to day is absolutely like everything that, you know, I needed to be a good teacher and, you know, do the things that I did before that and do the things after.
I'm guessing you're on the top of every associate's list as a mentor.
Look, I don't want to speak for them, but I do. I pride myself in that, and I think it's really important. And by the way, all I'm doing is modeling the amazing mentors that I was able to have in a big law environment that caused me to even decide this was something I could do in the first place, right? Like when I went to law school and I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, I didn't even really know that being a sort of transactional lawyer was something you could do. It's not like anyone in my family had gone to law school. I didn't know any lawyers. And so the people that I met through the interview process and who have been my mentors and still to this day are more senior partners and are mentors to me had the same sort of philosophy and way of thinking about what we do as a team-oriented approach. And we're all a team and we go in and we come out as a team. And so I've tried to do the same thing with associates that I work with because I think it's so important. And when you provide that space, again, similar to teaching, when you provide in a classroom in the same way that I do when I'm on a deal and I have a client team, the psychological safety to make mistakes, to have conversations, to ask questions, you do better work as a team. And so that approach is always going to win the day, as opposed to having people sitting around being scared of asking a question or saying that they don't understand something.
Now, a very logical question to ask you, and I'm sure you get this a lot, is for you to eventually, at some point, teach law school or teach. I mean, I'm sure. Is that on your list of things to do at some point? What do you think?
It totally is. So look, I love my job. I love what I do. I think it only gets more interesting and more challenging the more senior that I get. And I love that. I do think at some point when I've been doing this for a long enough time, I absolutely would love to teach a law school class. I think, again, like what I love is teaching, and this job sort of core to it is teaching and coaching.
Yeah.
And I'd love to go back and do that, either while I'm still at Cooley or sort of as a retirement plan, along with like wanting to, you know, frolic in a field of flowers and not look at email. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely part of the future in some way. So
I totally love the part about how you kind of when you think about it, really kind of made sense because you talked about how like even very very young age you kind of gravitated towards kind of a teaching a role or a mentorship role, tutoring roles. So it really does tie in super nicely and ended up being such a good fit for you for sure.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like I think a lot of people, when I talk to a lot of students or talk to a lot of associates who are like, I don't really know what to do. I don't know what my path is. It's not like I woke up and knew this is where I was going to be, right? It takes time and you're sort of on a path and a journey to figure out what feels right for you and what suits your skill set, but also is inspiring to you and makes you excited every day that you wake up. And so I think I always share that and sort of saying, look, I didn't even know the job that I do today was a job a person could have as a way to signal to people that you don't have to wake up and know exactly what you're going to do. You don't even have to know that while you're in law school. Like it is a part of discovery to say, how do I find my path? And by the way, that path can evolve even after you've been doing this for a long time, right? Like you could start to specialize in an area that you didn't even work in when you were an associate or even as an early partner. And so it's okay to not know.
Well, Sepideh, it's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time telling me this story. It's been really terrific, and I really appreciate your doing it.
Oh, so happy to do it. Thanks for taking the time. It's been a pleasure.
This is Richard Hsu and Sepideh Mousakhani. Thanks.